did this was through something they called a God swap. When people were being obnoxious or rebellious, they got moved out of their land, and when this happened, there was a break between the land and the heritage and the religion because people were being separated from their normal way of life and from their local gods. And so what the Romans did was a God swap. And so when groups became a part of the Roman Empire, they insisted that the local people adopt some of the Roman gods from their pantheon, and then the Romans would adopt some of the local gods from those people. And so they swapped gods. And it meant that the local people who might otherwise be tempted to rebel against the empire couldn't pray to their local gods anymore in hope that somehow they would take on the Romans and win, because their gods are also being prayed to by the Romans, and they were worshiping the Roman gods as well, and so there was a breakdown of religious devotion and a sense that there was some kind of divine power that would assist in the revolt. However, there was an exception to all of this, and it was amongst the Jews. As far as the Romans were concerned, the Jews were stubborn in their refusal to acknowledge any other god but their own. And to make matters all the more difficult, you can't even see their God. Many of the Romans assumed they were actually atheists because where is your God? What does he look like? And so the Romans made an exception for the Jews. They didn't demand that the Jews accept any of the Roman gods, and of course the Romans couldn't accept the Jewish God because he couldn't be added to their pantheon. They didn't know what he looked like. They couldn't set up an image and say, this is the Jewish God, and we worship him as well. And so, as for the Christians, they were seen by the Romans to simply be a subset or a sect of Jews. And as long as the Romans thought the Christians were basically Jewish, they didn't have any problems. The Jews were the only people who didn't have to offer incense to the emperor or to the gods, but everyone else had to, because to the Romans this was a matter of fidelity and loyalty and good citizenship. But in time, the Christians were becoming more numerous. And not only more numerous, there was more and more of them that were not ethnically Jewish. The church was becoming more Gentile, and many of the Jews did not like that. So the easiest way for the Jews to deal with such a thing would be to tip off the Roman government and to say, hey, look, these people over here, they're not actually Jews at all. They're not doing what they're supposed to do because they're not Jews, and so they're not worshiping the emperor, they're not worshiping the Roman pantheon. And so what happened was exactly what you might expect. And as a result, the full power of the Roman Empire fell upon the Christians in Smyrna. Now listen, the Christians were great citizens. They paid their taxes, they kept the peace, they honored all men, they obeyed all authority. But in this system, if you didn't offer incense to the emperor, you were a traitor. And so Christians face terrible persecution. So in the midst of that, Jesus says, I know your tribulation and I know your poverty, but you are rich. And the slander of those who says that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Jesus is offering them some wonderful encouragement. He's saying, look, everything you have in this world may be taken away, but still you are rich. Don't forget that. Your treasure is in heaven, where moth and rust cannot destroy and where thieves cannot break in and steal. You are rich. Notice also he says that those turning against them say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. It was because of these so-called Jews that the threats of imprisonment and death were hanging over the Christians. And so Jesus is telling them that these people are actually instruments in the hands of the evil one. Jesus is pointing out, if